The living room was suffocating with tension that evening, as I watched my mother Jacqueline and my younger sister Olivia, who had just announced they needed a place to stay due to financial difficulties. My mother's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning, instantly telling Olivia they could absolutely stay and she would make room for them. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach as I stood there in our modest two-bedroom home, the home I had struggled so hard to maintain. As usual, my wishes were pushed aside without a second thought. I attempted to speak with Mom in a controlled voice, asking if we could talk for a moment. She dismissed me with a contemptuous wave of her hand, saying she needed to prepare the guest room for Olivia and Benjamin. I watched as Olivia's lips curled into a smug smile, clearly relishing her favored position. My fists clenched involuntarily as anger bubbled up inside me like a pot about to boil over. I raised my voice, declaring this wasn't just her decision to make, that I lived here too and couldn't agree to them moving in without any discussion. My mother's face hardened as she stared me down, telling me to watch my attitude because Olivia was family and family comes first. What about me? I asked, my voice trembling with decades of pent-up emotion. I've sacrificed so much to keep this house running, and you treat me like I'm nothing but a burden. My mother's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, jabbing an accusatory finger in my direction and telling me if I couldn't accept my sister's situation, perhaps I should find somewhere else to live. Her words hit me like a physical slap across the face. I caught Olivia's quiet laughter behind her hand, clearly enjoying the drama she had created. Fine, I managed to say through a voice shaking with rage and hurt, that's exactly what I'll do. Without another word, I stormed out of the living room, hot tears streaming down my face. I had finally reached my breaking point. I paced my room like a caged animal, angry tears stinging my eyes as thoughts whirled through my mind. After everything I had done, how could Mom be so cruel? Here I was, being pushed out of the home I helped maintain to make room for Olivia and her deadbeat husband. My spiral of thoughts was interrupted by a knock at the door and my mother's irritated voice saying we needed to talk about this. I yanked the door open, fixing her with a steady glare and asking what there was to talk about. Her trying to kick me out for her favorite daughter? Mom's expression hardened as she told me not to be so dramatic, that Olivia and Benjamin were struggling and needed our help. Our help? I scoffed, bitter laughter escaping my lips. You mean my help? I've been paying half the bills here while Olivia's been nothing but a burden on everyone. My mother snapped at me to watch my mouth. She told me Olivia was going through a tough time and that I should show some compassion. I let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the hallway. Compassion? I said, that's rich coming from you. When was the last time you showed me any compassion? Her eyes narrowed to slits as she called me an ungrateful child, saying I should think about everything she had done for me. Everything you've done for me? I cut her off, my voice rising with years of suppressed pain. You mean constantly looking down on me, criticizing me, and always favoring Olivia no matter what? That's enough, she shouted, her face turning scarlet with rage. You will not speak to me like that in my house. Your house. I fired back, I've been maintaining this place with my paycheck while you've been catering to Olivia's every whim. Her expression morphed into one of pure contempt as she suggested it might be time for me to find my own place if I couldn't show basic kindness to my sister. I stared at her, feeling as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. You're throwing me out? I whispered, the words barely making it past my lips. She replied coldly that if that's what it took to teach me some manners, so be it. Something inside me shattered in that moment, like fine china hitting a tile floor. Fine, I said, my voice trembling with uncontrollable anger, but don't come crying to me when Olivia and her deadbeat husband leave you penniless. Her eyes widened, but before she could respond, I slammed the door in her face. I collapsed to the floor, hot tears streaming down my cheeks as my world crumbled around me. After that explosive fight with my mother, I knew there was no going back. I had to move out, start fresh, and leave this toxic family dynamic behind, no matter how much it hurt. With shaking hands, I called my best friend Megan, trying to hold back tears. I asked if I could stay at her place for a while, my voice barely steady enough to form the words. Megan's concerned voice came through the phone, immediately telling me I was welcome. When she asked what happened, I told her it was a long story, letting out a trembling sigh. I promised to explain everything when I arrived, asking if I could come that night. Without hesitation, Megan assured me her door was always open. With her support, I began packing my belongings, the task of sorting through the remnants of my life in this house feeling as heavy as lead. This home I'd worked so hard to maintain, only to be tossed aside like yesterday's garbage. As I folded clothes and packed my personal items, memories washed over me like a tidal wave. All the sacrifices I'd made to keep this household running smoothly over the years. The birthdays and celebrations where my efforts went unnoticed while Olivia basked in Mom's complete devotion. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away furiously. I couldn't fall apart now. I had to break free from this suffocating relationship that had been slowly poisoning me for years and forge my own path. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. It was Benjamin, Olivia's husband. I had no patience for his inevitable manipulative tactics. "What do you want?" I snapped through the door. Benjamin responded in that deceptively gentle voice of his, asking if we could talk, saying there had been a misunderstanding. I let out a harsh laugh and yanked the door open, glaring at him. "The only misunderstanding," I said, "was you two thinking you could waltz into my life and take over." He raised his hands in a placating gesture, telling me he understood this was a difficult situation but they really needed my help, that he and Olivia were going through hard times. "Hard times you brought on yourselves," I shot back, my words sharp as broken glass. "Don't you dare try to guilt me into enabling your irresponsible behavior." Benjamin's expression hardened as he told me to watch my attitude, reminding me we were family and family should support each other. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I told him to preach that sermon to Mom and Olivia. My position in this family had been made crystal clear. Before he could respond, I shouldered past him with my packed bags. "I'm done with all of you," I declared, "don't try to call me back." As I stepped out into the crisp night air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders for the first time in years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of hope for a better future. No more being taken for granted or treated like an afterthought. Megan welcomed me to her apartment with open arms and a warm embrace when I arrived with my bags. She looked at me with worried eyes, apologizing that things had come to this. I managed a tense smile, fighting back tears as I thanked her for letting me stay, explaining I couldn't be near them anymore. Megan ushered me inside, and I immediately felt a sense of peace wash over me. Her cozy living room was such a contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my family home. She gestured to her comfortable couch, telling me to make myself at home and offering me a drink, maybe some wine. I shook my head and sank into the soft cushions, telling her water would be fine. As Megan disappeared into the kitchen, I let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of the past few hours settling over me. I was truly on my own now, away from the toxic relationships that had been draining me for so long. Megan returned with a glass of water and a reassuring smile, telling me she was ready to listen. I took a sip of the cool water before beginning my story. I told her everything. Mom's blatant favoritism, Olivia's entitled attitude, and the explosive fight that led to my being pushed out. Megan's brow furrowed with anger as she said she couldn't believe they would treat me that way. "After all you've done to support that family, they just cast you aside," she said with disbelief. "I know," I replied, my voice trembling with emotion, "but no matter how much it hurts, I just can't take it anymore." Megan reached out and squeezed my hand tightly, telling me I was doing the right thing and it was time to live for myself. Her words resonated deep within my soul, igniting a spark of determination. For far too long, I had sacrificed my own happiness and well-being for a family that never appreciated me, but that chapter was over now. Over the next few days, I settled into Megan's guest room, slowly unpacking and rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of family expectations. It was exhilarating to engage in activities purely for my own enjoyment, without fear of judgment or criticism. At work, I threw myself into projects with renewed energy, impressing my boss with my dedication and innovative ideas. For the first time in years, I felt pride and accomplishment that had nothing to do with pleasing my family. As days turned into weeks, the weight of the past gradually lifted, replaced by a sense of newfound freedom and possibility. I was living for myself, and the future had never looked brighter. A few weeks after moving into Megan's place, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Each time, it was either Mom or Olivia, leaving increasingly desperate messages begging for a response. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to reopen that toxic chapter of my life. One evening, while Megan and I were chatting over takeout, the phone rang again. I started to ignore it, but Megan gave me a meaningful look, suggesting I should answer as they might finally have something important to say. With a sigh, I picked up the phone and asked what Mom wanted. "Oh, thank goodness," her desperate voice came through the line, telling me things were terrible. I felt a twisted satisfaction hearing the desperation in her tone. "Oh, really?" I replied, having trouble managing without me? Mother's tense voice told me it wasn't just that. They were behind on the mortgage and about to have their utilities cut off. A laugh escaped my lips as I asked her why she thought that happened, reminding her she shouldn't have thrown out the person who helped pay the bills. "Please," she begged, "we need your help, we're barely surviving." After years of being ignored and dismissed, I felt a perverse satisfaction in their predicament. The tables had finally turned. "Well, Mom," I said, my voice dripping with contempt, "I warned you what would happen when you chose Olivia over me, and now you're facing the consequences." "I made a mistake," she cried out. She begged me to help just this once, saying she regretted how she'd treated me. In the background, I could hear Olivia's muffled sobs, and part of me felt a pang of sympathy, but the wounds were too deep. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said firmly, "you told me to leave, so I did, now it's your turn to figure things out on your own." With those words, I hung up, ignoring the flood of text messages and voicemails that followed. Megan looked at me with a mix of concern and understanding, gently asking if I was okay. I took a deep breath and nodded, telling her I was fine and that it felt a little satisfying to watch them reap what they'd sown. Megan gave me a supportive smile, saying I had every right to stand my ground. They'd chosen their path, and now they had to accept the consequences. As time passed, the calls from Mom and Olivia grew increasingly desperate. Apparently, Benjamin had been hiding serious debts, which had cost him his job, and their financial situation was deteriorating. Part of me felt guilty for not helping, but a stronger part knew that enabling their dysfunction would only prolong this toxic cycle. Sometimes, no matter how painful, letting people face the consequences was the only way to break free. I had finally cut the ties that had bound me for years, and I wouldn't let them pull me back in. This was their problem, not mine. Over the next few months, the situation at my old home grew worse. Megan kept me updated with neighborhood gossip about unpaid bills piling up, debt collectors making frequent visits, and rumors of Olivia and Benjamin turning to unsavory activities to make ends meet. Part of me felt a twisted satisfaction watching their lives unravel. After years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home, seeing them face the consequences felt like poetic justice. Yet another part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. No matter how much they'd hurt me, they were still my family, and watching their downward spiral was painful. One evening, as Megan and I were sharing a bottle of wine and catching up, she hesitantly broached the subject. She gently told me that while she understood I was still hurting, maybe it was time to let go of some of that anger. I sighed, swirling the red wine in my glass as I told her I wasn't sure. They'd put me through hell for so long, and part of me felt they deserved to suffer. Megan reached across the table and squeezed my hand, saying she understood, truly, but holding on to this bitterness would only end up hurting me in the long run. Her words touched a sensitive spot in my heart. No matter how satisfying it was to watch my family crumble, was I really any better than them if I held on to this much resentment? The next day, as I was preparing for an important presentation, my phone vibrated with a call from Mom. I hesitated for a moment before answering, carefully saying hello. My mother's voice was an emotional whisper as she told me she didn't know where to begin. I braced myself for another wave of excuses and manipulation, but instead, Mom continued with a genuine, "I'm so sorry," her words broken by quiet sobs. She told me she had been a terrible mother and that I deserved so much better. As she opened her heart and took full responsibility for all the pain she'd caused me, I felt my resolve beginning to waver. She said she could never make up for how she'd treated me, but begged me to let her try, saying she'd do anything to earn my forgiveness. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that no matter how much I enjoyed watching her suffer, holding on to this bitterness was only poisoning myself. "Mom," I said, my voice softer than I'd intended, "I can't pretend everything's okay. Between us, you really hurt me." She replied in a voice full of regret, saying she understood and would spend the rest of her life making amends if I'd let her. I took a deep breath and let go of the anger and emotions that had been tormenting me for so long. "Okay, Mom," I said, "let's start over, one step at a time." It wouldn't be an easy journey, but in that moment, I realized true healing could only come through forgiveness. Not just for them, but for myself. After that emotional conversation with Mom, I felt like a weight had been lifted. Rebuilding our relationship wouldn't be simple, but for the first time in years, I felt hope for healing. Over the next few months, Mom made constant efforts to repair things. She listened carefully as I talked about my pain and feelings of abandonment, inviting me to weekly dinners. It was hard, but I could see genuine remorse in her eyes. Meanwhile, Olivia and Benjamin kept their distance. Last I heard, they'd moved into a modest apartment and were slowly getting back on their feet. Part of me still harbored resentment toward them, but I knew holding on to that bitterness would only hold me back. As for me, I continued to grow in my newfound independence. At work, I took on parallel projects, getting opportunities to showcase my creativity and problem-solving skills. My boss was impressed with my dedication and innovative ideas, and rumors of a promotion began circulating around the office. In my personal life, I discovered new hobbies and interests I'd neglected for far too long. I joined a local book club, engaging in vibrant discussions and exploring new literary worlds. I even tried pottery, finding peace and tranquility in the simple act of shaping clay. Megan remained my steadfast support system, encouraging me every step of the way. "I'm so proud of you," she said one evening as we shared wine on her balcony. "You've come such a long way." I smiled, basking in the warm glow of her friendship. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied sincerely. "You were there when my family wasn't." As time passed, I realized I was truly letting go of the past. The anger and resentment that had once consumed me gradually faded, replaced by a new sense of self-worth and confidence. One evening, as I was getting ready to go out with colleagues, my phone vibrated with a text from Mom. "I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. You've become such a strong, independent woman. I'm honored to be part of your life again." Reading her words brought tears to my eyes, but for the first time, they weren't tears of pain or bitterness. They were tears of gratitude and healing. Finally, I was free from the toxic cycle that had held me back for so long. I was no longer defined by past abandonment and abuse. Instead, I was forging my own path, surrounded by people who truly valued and supported me. Stepping out into the warm evening air, I felt a sense of peace and contentment. This journey had been long and difficult, but I'd emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before.